Iron Jack Jackson Malone was a scary man. The blood hadn't even dried on their boots when they posed for this photograph. 3 hours earlier, these 5 men had walked into a bank in Mineral Wells, Texas, and turned it into a slaughterhouse. 13 dead, including a 6-year-old girl caught in the crossfire. And here they are in a Fort Worth portrait studio that same afternoon, dressed in fine suits, smiling at the camera, rifles still loaded, acting like they'd just come back from a Sunday hunt instead of the worst massacre Texas had ever seen. Look at the man seated on the left in the front row, the one with the rifle across his lap and that slight smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. That's Jackson Iron Jack Malone. And those 4 men surrounding him weren't his business partners or hunting companions. They were the most vicious gang of killers Texas had produced since the Comanche Wars ended, and this photograph would become the death warrant that hunted them all to their graves. Jackson Malone got his nickname the hard way, by surviving things that should have killed him. Born in Kentucky in 1855, he'd come west with his family at age 10. His father tried ranching and failed, tried farming and failed, tried drinking and succeeded too well. When Jack was 14, his father shot his mother during a drunken rage, then turned the gun on himself. Jack found both bodies in the morning. That kind of trauma breaks something fundamental that never quite heals. Right. Jack spent the next few years drifting, working cattle drives, learning to handle horses and guns, growing hard in a hard land. By 18, he'd killed his first man, a cowboy who'd accused him of cheating at cards. Jack shot him through the heart and walked out like nothing had happened. The marshal ruled it self-defense. Jack learned an important lesson. If you stayed calm and told the right story, you could get away with murder. His reputation grew through the late 1870s. Ranch owners hired him as an enforcer during range disputes. He'd deliver warnings, and if warnings didn't work, he'd deliver bullets. People started calling him Iron Jack because bullets seemed to bounce off him. He'd been shot 3 times by 1880 and survived all 3. He'd been knifed twice, thrown from horses, caught in stampedes, and he just kept going, kept surviving, kept getting harder. But enforcement work only paid so much. So in 1881, at age 26, he decided to form a gang and take what he wanted. The gang. Look at the photograph again. The man standing directly behind Iron Jack, the one with the Winchester held upright, is Thomas Scarface Riley. You can see the scar even in the photograph, a white line running from his left eye down to his jaw, courtesy of a broken bottle in a Galveston saloon fight. Riley had been a Confederate guerrilla during the war, and he'd never adjusted to peacetime. He killed easily and enjoyed it in a way that made even Iron Jack nervous. The tall man standing in the center of the back row is Benjamin Long Ben Cartwright, 6'4" in an era when most men topped out at 5'8". He'd been a buffalo hunter before the herds disappeared, then briefly worked as a railroad detective before realizing there was more money on the other side of the law. He was the gang's planner, the one who studied banks and escape routes. Standing on the right is Samuel Garrett, no nickname necessary. Garrett was quiet, almost shy, the kind of man you wouldn't notice in a crowd. That was exactly what made him valuable. Nobody suspected him of anything. He was also the best shot in the gang, capable of hitting targets at distances that seemed impossible. And seated next to Iron Jack is the youngest member, Michael "Kid" Donovan, just 19 years old when this photograph was taken. The kid was an orphan from San Antonio who'd fallen in with the gang after Iron Jack caught him trying to steal horses. Instead of turning him in, Jack recruited him. The kid worshipped Iron Jack, would follow him anywhere, do anything he asked. Together, they'd robbed 7 banks and 3 trains between 1881 and 1883, netting over $40,000. They'd killed at least 18 people during those robberies. They were wanted in 5 states with rewards totaling $8,000 dead or alive. And they were getting bolder. The mineral wells job. The First National Bank of Mineral Wells was supposed to be an easy target. Long Ben had scouted it for 2 weeks. The town was small, barely 800 people. The bank had 2 elderly guards who'd probably never fired their weapons in anger. The vault held payroll money for local mining operations, estimated at $15,000. They rode into Mineral Wells on the morning of March 18, 1883. The town was quiet. The gang hitched their horses outside the bank, left the kid to watch them, and walked inside. Iron Jack, Scarface Riley, Long Ben, and Samuel Garrett. The bank had 4 customers and 3 employees inside. Iron Jack drew his revolver and announced, this was a robbery, that everyone should cooperate and nobody would get hurt. Then everything went wrong. One of the elderly guards, a man named William Fletcher, who'd fought at Gettysburg, went for his shotgun. Scarface Riley shot him before the guard's weapon cleared its holster. Fletcher went down hard, and suddenly everyone was screaming, panicking. The second guard fired at Long Ben, missed, and Samuel Garrett shot him twice in the chest. A customer tried to run, and Iron Jack shot him in the back. The bank president dove behind his desk and came up with a revolver, fired wildly, and one of his shots hit a woman customer in the shoulder. The gang opened fire on everyone, not bothering with control, just shooting anything that moved. The kid, hearing gunfire, ran into the bank to help. More shooting, more screaming, smoke filling the air until nobody could see clearly. By the time the shooting stopped, 11 people inside the bank were dead or dying. The gang stuffed money into bags and ran outside. That's when they discovered the entire town had heard the gunfire, and armed men were taking positions all around them. The Battle Mineral Wells was a mining town, full of rough men who knew how to handle weapons. When the shooting started, men grabbed rifles and converged on Main Street. The Malone gang came out of that bank into a shooting gallery. Bullets came from windows, doorways, rooftops. The kid was hit immediately, a bullet through his left arm that dropped him to his knees. Long Ben took a hit to his leg. Samuel Garrett was struck in the shoulder. Iron Jack stayed calm and returned fire with methodical precision. He shot a shopkeeper firing from across the street. He shot a miner behind a water trough. He kept his gang moving toward their horses while bullets flew like hornets. They made it to their horses and mounted up, the wounded men hauling themselves into saddles through pure terror and adrenaline. They rode out at full gallop, firing back at pursuers. 2 more people died during the escape, a 6-year-old girl hit by a stray bullet and an elderly man who suffered a heart attack. That brought the death toll to 13, with 8 wounded. It was the bloodiest bank robbery in Texas history, and the gang had gotten away with maybe $9,000, less than they'd hoped for, bought with more blood than they'd ever shed before. The portrait. 3 hours after the massacre, the Malone gang rode into Fort Worth like they owned the place. Instead of running, instead of hiding, Iron Jack decided they should celebrate. They got rooms at the best hotel. They bought fine suits. They ate at expensive restaurants. And then Iron Jack had an idea that seemed brilliant, but would prove fatal. He wanted a photograph, a formal studio portrait with all of them armed and dressed like gentlemen, proof of what they'd accomplished. A record of the Malone gang at the height of their power. They found a portrait studio on Main Street run by a photographer named Albert Morrison. Morrison was nervous when 5 hard-looking men walked in with rifles, but they were polite and paid cash up front. Look at that photograph one more time. Morrison spent 30 minutes arranging them, getting the lighting right. The men joked with each other. Iron Jack sat in the front row with his rifle across his lap, that slight smirk on his face. Scarface Riley stood behind him, scar visible. Long Ben towered over them all. Samuel Garrett stood quietly, and the kid tried to look tough, despite being just 19. Morrison told them to hold still and captured the image. The exposure took nearly a minute. When he told them it was done, they thanked him, paid extra for rush processing, and said they'd be back tomorrow for the prints. They never came back, because by then all of Texas was hunting them. The manhunt. Texas exploded in outrage. 13 dead, including a little girl. A massacre in broad daylight. The governor offered a $1,000 reward for each gang member. The railroad companies added more. Within a week, the bounty reached $12,000, and someone found that photograph, the portrait the gang had taken in Fort Worth. Suddenly, that elegant backdrop seemed sinister. Those rifles weren't hunting tools, they were murder weapons. Iron Jack's smirk became the expression of a man who'd just committed atrocity and didn't care. The photograph was reproduced in newspapers everywhere, turned into wanted posters, distributed to every lawman west of the Mississippi. It became the most famous criminal photograph of the era. 5 killers frozen in time, their faces forever marked for death. The gang scattered after the portrait session. The kid, wounded and terrified, tried to make it to Mexico, but only got as far as Austin before a deputy recognized him from the photograph. He surrendered without a fight and was hanged 6 weeks later, crying for his mother from the gallows. Samuel Garrett disappeared completely. Some claimed he made it to California and lived there under a different name. Others said he went back east. The photograph was all that remained of him. His face, frozen in time, forever wanted. Long Ben Cartwright lasted 3 months before a ranger patrol caught him near El Paso. He tried to shoot his way out and took 2 rangers with him before a bullet through the skull ended his run. They identified him from the photograph. Scarface Riley made it to the Oklahoma Territory, kept moving, kept robbing. A U.S. Marshal found him in a boarding house in Tulsa in January 1884. Riley went for his gun, and the Marshal shot him 4 times. He died on the floor, that scar still visible on his cold face. Iron Jack's end. Iron Jack Malone vanished after Fort Worth. There were sightings from Colorado to Louisiana, but none confirmed. The photograph haunted him. Every lawman in the West had seen it, could recognize that face. He couldn't go into towns, couldn't stay in hotels, couldn't show his face without risk. The most persistent story claimed he fled to Mexico and lived there for 2 years, working on a ranch under a false name. But the photograph had made it to Mexico too. Wanted posters in every border town. In the spring of 1885, a bounty hunter named Charles Wade heard about a man matching Iron Jack's description working on a ranch near Chihuahua. Wade rode south and found him fixing a fence unarmed, looking older than his 30 years. Wade called out. Iron Jack turned, and Wade recognized that face immediately from the photograph. Even thinner, more weathered, it was unmistakably the same man who'd sat in that portrait studio with murder fresh on his hands. Jack went for a pistol. Wade was faster. He shot Iron Jack 3 times, chest, stomach, head. Iron Jack Malone died in Mexican dust, far from Texas, far from the photograph that sealed his fate. Wade collected $4,000 in reward money and brought the body back to Texas. They buried Jackson Malone in an unmarked grave outside Fort Worth, just miles from the portrait studio where he'd posed 2 years earlier. The legacy. That photograph remained famous long after all the men in it were dead. It appeared in books about Western outlaws, in museums, in historical archives. People studied it, trying to understand how 5 men could look so ordinary, so civilized, and commit such horror. Photographer Albert Morrison said the men had seemed normal, even friendly. They joked, talked about cattle prices and weather. Nothing suggested they'd just killed 13 people, or that they'd all be dead within 2 years. The families of the mineral wells victims kept copies of the photograph. One widow put it in a frame with the caption, "Remember, evil has a face," and kept it on her mantle for 40 years. The massacre changed how Texas handled outlaws. Laws became stricter, sentences harsher. The era of romantic frontier outlaws ended with that photograph. Nobody could look at those 5 men and think of them as anything but killers. Look at the photograph one final time. 5 men in a portrait studio, dressed like gentlemen, armed like soldiers, looking directly at the camera. Hours earlier, 13 people had died at their hands. Within 2 years, all 5 would be dead too, hanged, shot, hunted down like animals. Iron Jack sits there in the front left, rifle across his lap, that slight smirk on his face. He looks confident, amused, like this is all a game. He had no idea this photograph would be his death warrant, that his face would haunt wanted posters across the West, that it would be the last time he'd ever feel safe. The photograph captured more than images. It captured the moment before everything fell apart, the high point before the crash. Everything that came after, the manhunt, the deaths, all flows from this frozen moment. They thought they were creating a trophy. Instead, they created evidence that hunted them to their graves. The photographer's flash that day illuminated more than faces. It lit up their futures, all ending in blood and dust and unmarked graves. That's the power of a photograph. It freezes time, preserves a moment, tells truth whether subjects want it told or not. And this photograph told the truth about 5 killers who smiled for the camera with blood on their boots, who thought they were above consequence, who learned too late that every crime demands payment. The studio portrait that captured 5 killers, the photograph that became a wanted poster, all frozen in silver and glass, forever evidence of the moment when a gang of murderers stood in front of a camera and smiled. And Iron Jack Malone's slight smirk, forever captured, forever damning, forever proof that evil doesn't always look like evil until you know what it's done.